In the first week of January 2026, China quietly pulled a very powerful lever. Not a missile launch, not a naval blockade. Instead, Beijing reached for something far more subtle, and arguably far more dangerous: control over the materials that keep modern industry alive. Rare earth elements. What's unfolding between China and Japan right now isn't just a regional dispute. It's a slow, methodical stress test of the global system itself. To understand how we got here, we need to roll back to November 7th, 2025. Japan's Prime Minister, Sanai Takaichi, stood before Parliament and did something no Japanese leader had done so explicitly in decades. She said that if China attacks Taiwan, it would be an existential crisis for Japan, and that Tokyo would have the legal right to respond militarily. In a country whose post-war identity was built on pacifism, this wasn't just a statement, it was a historic pivot. Japan's so-called pacifist constitution, especially Article 9, has long renounced war and the maintenance of offensive forces. For 78 years, that clause shaped everything from budgets to public opinion. But over time, legal reinterpretations chipped away at it. In 2015, new security laws allowed collective self-defense, the idea that Japan could fight if an ally, like the United States, was under serious threat. Takaichi's remark extended that logic to Taiwan. For Beijing, that crossed a red line. Japan's response at home was not just rhetorical. In late 2025, the cabinet approved a record defense budget, about 9.04 trillion yen, or 58 billion US dollars, for fiscal year 2026. That's a 9.4% jump in a single year, and puts Japan on track to spend roughly 2% of its GDP on defense, a benchmark associated more with NATO than post-war Tokyo. Quietly, Japan is becoming the world's third largest military spender, sitting just behind the United States and China. So where is this money going? A large part of it is about distance. Japan is investing heavily in what it calls standoff capabilities, weapons that can strike far from its shores. That includes about 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles from the United States, with ranges near 1,000 kilometers, giving Japan the ability to hit targets along China's eastern seaboard. At the same time, Tokyo is upgrading its homegrown Type 12 missile, extending its reach from roughly 200 kilometers up toward 900 kilometers and beyond, and adapting it for land, sea, air, and even submarine launch. Submarines are another quiet part of this story. Japan is now moving to arm its boats with long-range cruise missiles launched from standard torpedo tubes. In practice, that means a Japanese vessel, sitting silently hundreds of kilometers away, could strike ships or land targets before being detected. When you combine that with advanced Aegis-equipped destroyers and modern fighter jets, Japan's military posture starts to look very different from the self-defense-only force it once was. Beijing has not been passive. In November 2025, the People's Liberation Army staged live fire drills in the Yellow Sea, restricting navigation and sending a clear signal about China's ability to project power near Japan's maritime approaches. Then, on December 7th, Chinese J-15 fighters reportedly locked their fire control radars onto Japanese F-15S near the Miyako Strait, essentially the airborne equivalent of taking the safety off a weapon. Japan protested. Washington called it destabilizing. Days later, US B-52 bombers flew joint missions with Japanese F-35s and F-15 to underline the alliance. But perhaps the most consequential move didn't happen in the sky or at sea. On January 6, 2026, China announced restrictions on exports of so-called dual-use goods to Japan, items that can serve both civilian and military purposes. In practice, this hits a broad range of technologies, but the biggest pressure point is rare earth elements. Japan depends on China for around 60% of these materials, which are essential for everything from electric cars and wind turbines to smartphones and advanced weapon systems. Economists estimate that if a limited restriction lasted 3 months, the Japanese economy could lose roughly 660 billion yen and see a small but noticeable hit to GDP. Stretch that to a year, and the projected loss rises to about 2.6 trillion yen, something like 16.5 billion US dollars, along with deeper disruptions to industries like automotive manufacturing and electronics. For companies that remember China's rare earth squeeze in 2010, this feels uncomfortably familiar. While this plays out, another, smaller cluster of rocks sits quietly in the East China Sea. The Senkaku Islands, known in China as Diaoyu. They're uninhabited, but they sit near potential oil and gas reserves, key shipping lanes, and they matter enormously to questions of national pride and legal precedent. China has steadily increased its Coast Guard presence around these islands, maintaining record numbers of days in the surrounding waters, and engaging in what analysts call gray zone pressure, coercive activity that stops just short of armed conflict. The risk is that all of these strands intersect: Taiwan, the Senkaku dispute, missile buildups, and now, economic coercion. Japan's leaders see Taiwan as a critical buffer. It lies close to Japan's own islands and sits astride the sea lanes that carry energy and trade. At the same time, Taiwan's semiconductor industry is a cornerstone of the global digital economy. A conflict there, drawing in China, Japan, and the United States, would ripple through everything from consumer electronics to industrial machinery. So where does this leave us? Realistically, the most likely path in the short term is continued pressure below the threshold of open war. Patrols near disputed islands, military drills, and carefully calibrated trade restrictions. But as forces operate in closer proximity, the chance of an accident or miscalculation grows. A misread radar lock, a collision at sea, a crisis in the Taiwan Strait. In complex systems, it's often the small, unplanned events that matter most. If you enjoy this kind of calm, deep dive into how technology, economics, and geopolitics intersect, consider subscribing to Macro Decoded. There's a lot more unfolding beneath the headlines, and this China-Japan story is only just beginning.